our approach, perfect. Our approach then is to start at the San Joaquin Valley and review water budgets, see what's out there, see what the GSAs have put together, the groundwater sustainability agencies have put together in terms of sustainable withdrawals, look at what the overdraft is. I can put some pictures up on that kind of stuff and what surface availability is. And then examine the link between disadvantaged communities and agriculture. And we've done this in different parts again. And then describe what our regulatory environment looks like in terms of what farms operate under. How does SGMA impact in terms of an additional operating constraint per farm? So some tangential work that we've been doing with folks on CARP that are on right now. Our next little step then is to focus in on the Tule subbasins. So we did that because that's one of the areas that we had partner works that we had ideas about in terms of water withdrawals and where things were at, and a nice focus area for our regional model. So we put our regional model to work. That's and looked at the subbasin there and said, okay, what's the impact of SGMA? How are the groundwater sustainability plans all coming together in that area? Look at estimating sector impacts, and then think about how we can illustrate how flexibility in groundwater use might mitigate some of these impacts. And then take a step back out, think about the San Joaquin Valley as a whole, think about opportunities for doing better research, economic research and climate change research, incorporating disadvantaged communities, examining opportunities for disadvantaged community resilience. And again, that's some of the stuff that the folks at Merced talked about on health, talked about on Monday. And then overlaying some of these communities with water overdraft to understand what areas might be impacted the most and where we might be able to concentrate some efforts for immediate transitions. There we go. So what I want to do today is give you an overview of our economic impacts and talk about that piece, and then we can kind of discuss other aspects of the project later on, or point you to our website that we have set up where we've got all that stuff on it. So first thing to think about, what do future water withdrawals look like? Where are we overdrafted? What's the current state right now? So Dan has put together some really neat maps at RTRC to visualize where things are, where we have overconsumption, I should say. Red being the places where where overdraft is the worst, and then down to yellow from there. So just taking a look at the valley, I think one of the biggest takeaways, one of the things that we probably all know working in this space, is that overdraft is not the same, right? It's not the same across the valley, and that solutions shouldn't be the same either, right? So distribution of groundwater overdraft is not spread evenly. Surface water allocations are not spread evenly across the valley. So being in the current implementation period of our groundwater sustainability plans, we know that those plans vary in projects and management actions to achieve sustainability. And those plans should vary in how they achieve sustainability, because not everywhere is treated the same. I think this was a nice point that was put out on Monday when we were talking about repurposing farmland, is that every area where we go to repurpose farmland should think about how they can do it differently and how that might fit in with that community the most. Local communities are going to be impacted differently depending on local conditions, surface water rights, water conveyance ability, and their GSPs. And so I think a very front take home from this is it's not going to be a one-size-fit-all solutions. There's a lot of different things going on. How agriculture production exists, it varies widely across the valley. And it's varied widely across time. We have a wonderful project that we had a student do a while ago that looked at how agricultural production has changed just in the Tule subbasin that we can talk about later. So what, let's zoom down now and focus on the Tule subbasin. So in terms of disadvantaged communities, a significant share of the San Joaquin Valley is designated as a disadvantaged community, and so is the Tule subbasin. So the Tule subbasin, you can see pulling out of the map, it's in the lower west, southwest portion of Tulare County. it's the disadvantaged community population is around 120,000, 119,000. Tulare County population is 440,000. Approximately 25% of employment in the county is farm labor, and that's about the same for the subbasin as well. So we're thinking of a fairly large portion of the population is employed in agricultural directly. And so those are the impacts that we're going to look at, is that direct agricultural employment impact in terms of farm labor and farm management. Right. The subbasin is made up of 6 groundwater sustainability agencies. They all have an agreement in terms of the plan. There's 17 agricultural water basin areas, and this is going to inform how we do some of our modeling. A lot of variability in surface water access as well. So there's areas in the subbasin that have good surface water access. There's areas that don't, and so that's going to drive some of these differences and how they achieve sustainability, differences in the types of crops that are going to be able to be grown in the future. So water supply, different sources of surface water from the CVP imports, some small local supplies, groundwater from subsurface inflow, losses, manage recharge, and applied water return flow, right? That's where our groundwater is at. That's where our levels are at. Sustainable yield based on the GSA share of natural and artificial flows tells us, and what the GSP tells us for the broader area is that sustainable yields around 257,000 acre feet a year, right? So we can look at where we've been total groundwater for the subbasin. Withdrawals vary year to year, right? Depending on how much rainfall we have. We know that we're in a pretty critical drought right now that is going to last at least for another year or two, I read the other day. So what withdrawals look like depend on where other sources are going to be. In terms of agriculture, you can see from our map here, we've got our 6 different GSAs put out, and the gross value of agriculture in 2018, which were numbers we started the project with and we started our modeling with. A couple of things to note, just looking at this, is that we've got, you know, a real spread of how agriculture is distributed, right? Most of our CAFOs, or dairies, I should say, are located up in the lower Tule River, up here up north, and we've got around those field crops like corn that go to, you know, silage that go to support those. Got citrus down south. We've got some nuts spread around here too. So how agriculture is spread throughout the subbasin is different, right? It's not evenly spread. That's another point that we have to take in when we're doing an analysis like this, to say, you know, what does the distribution of crops look like across the area, so that when we model it, we can think about how that distribution might change. Right? Overall, this subbasin is in terms of ag value, gross value is close to $2 billion. So this isn't an insignificant production area, I should say. This is a really important area in terms of production. We break that out by major crop groups. We can see total acreage in 2018 was a little under 300,000, and broken out, most of it's in grapes and citrus and nuts. Grapes and nuts and citrus in that area, and then a lot devoted to, again, the dairies. About 150 dairies, I think, we're operating up there, around $1 billion worth of value. We've got farm labor employment, estimates of farm labor employment and farm management employment in the area. I should say our farm labor employment estimates depend on what we think the take-home value is. So basically, we have a value of employment for these models, and we can divide out an annual salary to get number of workers. And so our estimate for annual salary is between 23,000 and about 50,000 a year, depending on if we're looking at household or individual. So that gives us between 11,000 and 25,000 farm labor folks working in the area, and then about 1,500 farm management folks that are working in the area. Again, most of these crops are high-valued orchards, citrus, and row crops that support some of these dairies. Cool. So I'm not going to jump into the specifics of the model just because I'd like to leave a little bit more room for discussion, and we can talk about those types of things otherwise. But I do want to talk about some of the objectives, what this model does, right? So it's a hydroeconomic model that can quantify the link between policy, businesses, and jobs, looking at these things. It's got location-specific crops that are grown, values of those crops, and the water that's available in those areas as well. So this model is able to include disparities between white areas and locations with access to surface water, right? So we can evaluate groundwater trading as a strategy to minimize adjustment costs. So this is a pretty novel thing that we can include economics, agricultural production, and water into one single model, so we can see how things change, and we'll be able to see that in our outcome, how we changes acres for different types of crops and how jobs flow with that, depending on the water that's available and how that water goes. Right, so we'll be able to estimate changes in the agricultural footprint in the subbasin, including land idling, changes in agricultural value, which leads to changes in production, and therefore leads to changes in local labor demand. Right, so how many jobs are going to be available afterwards? All right, so taking all of the GSPs, I should say, COVID's impacted a lot of the ways that we do business. We had plans to get this model up and running and out in late 2019, and COVID hit and really delayed a lot of our work. Upside to that is that it delayed it past all of the publishing of the groundwater sustainability plans. So we were able to incorporate all of the projects and management actions into the model and say, okay, here we go. The GSP implementation estimates about 40,000 new acre feet of inflows in the whole subbasin. This is through recharge, new imports, local reservoir expansion. And then we see aggregate production, aggregate pumping reductions. This is again in the subbasin to be by approximately 226,000 acre feet by 2040 through a series of phased gradual reductions. So we can see our different inflows on the left-hand axis, right? New inflows over here, most of that coming through imports. And then we see our reductions in pumping and how that's phased in over time. Yeah, so we were able to incorporate a lot of that stuff, which is a positive, I should say, and see how things are going to work out in 2040. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this economic model is look at flexibility in terms of achieving demand management. What that means is if we say, all right, these specific areas have a rigid allocation of groundwater, this is what it's set, that's what our first scenario is going to be. Then we're going to evaluate another scenario, that's flexibility and allocation within water basin area, right? And so we see a little bit of flexibility in who can pump and where, and we can put values on an acre foot of water. And then we ran another scenario, a third scenario, which I'm not going to show you today, which would be flexibility allocating across the whole subbasin, which of course is dependent on engineering and other things that we really don't want to get into, but just, look at what's very local in terms of allocation versus rigid or flexible. Variability in the value of crops, right? So an acre of citrus has a different value than an acre of almonds. And that means that there's a different value of the water as well, right? So however much water it takes to grow a particular crop goes into, we can back out the value of that water. So thinking about that, we know that there might be potential gains from trading water, right? So if water is linked to the crops that are grown and how much water goes to a particular crop, we can see different values of water. We can see there might be gains in trading water, right? Some of the initial GSP discussions in the district documents give a little bit of insight. And the Delano GSA, groundwater transfers be limited to the water balance areas, meaning district users would be unable to transfer water to white areas, but within that water balance area, we could see trading possible. And a couple of the other GSAs, water transfers Certain groundwater credits would be allowed within that GSA, also thinking about groundwater transfers with users and other GSAs. So there's some thought that's here. I know some of our project partners at ERA are working with other GSAs throughout the Valley to think about how to implement some of these flexible management programs. And so it's going on, and it's being thought about in different areas. So just in our particular study area right here in the Tule Subbasin, this is where we're at. So let's just jump in and look at some numbers. Right now, gross value again is a little under 2 billion in the study area in the Tule Subbasin, and then we've got scenario 1 and scenario 2 right next to it. So these two scenarios, again, the first one being rigid water allocations, the second one being a little bit more flexible in the water balance areas. You can see some transfers there. And what we see is a little bit of a mitigating impact, right? So 2 billion right now in 2040, we're going to see just as is with the implementation of the GSP, we can see the value, gross value of agriculture decreasing to 1.4 billion. If we allow for a little bit of flexibility within water balance areas, the mitigating effect is about what, 16% there, right? So the value of agriculture is going to drop. I don't think there's any way around that because we've got to reduce groundwater pumping, but we can mitigate some of this. Or there's potential. If we look at this in terms of crop groups, this is where we really see that trade-off between crops, right? Which things go, which things stay, right? So we're here. So we've got our current acreage, again, a little under 300,000 acres. And then we see the difference here. So rigid allocation, and we see our reductions right here down to 210,000 acres. If we're a little bit more flexible, we can keep about, what's that, 20,000 acres in production, and we see that trade, right? So movement away from grains, away from alfalfa, from field crops, and towards some of those higher value things. I should say, I want to point out here really quick, I know we've got some dairy folks on the line here, silage and some of our other field crops go to, as an input, or used as an input into high value things like milk, right? And that's one thing that wasn't put into the model. A lot of different questions that we can ask with these types of models. We want to just keep it pretty focused on this one. And so some of these transfers are, might belie what's really going on because they're moving into other things. But just as is, we could see folks basically saying, no, we're not going to grow silage anymore. We're going to grow more grapes, table grapes, or however that might be. And that particular effect is what we see here on our employment. So this is where we're really getting into how we might see and what the impact of SGMA is in this particular area on farm labor. So what we have here is current employment. This is assuming the low farm labor income plus the farm management. Current employment in our different crops right here, about 26,000 folks, which we had talked about before. With the implementation of SGMA and the GSP by 2040, we can expect that employment number to drop to about a little over 19,000. If we allow for a little bit of flexibility, we see some of that transfer from certain types of crops and the labor that goes to those crops into the other ones. And we're able to keep a few more jobs, basically, which is a great thing. I want to note that this doesn't consider any trends towards automation, less hand labor intensive crops or practices. Between the 2012 and 2017 census in the whole of California, we saw 90,000 fewer agricultural jobs. And so we've been moving that way for a variety of reasons, and that's probably going to continue. Right? The other thing to note here is that these are just direct agricultural labor, right? So this is just farm labor and management. This doesn't include any indirect or induced multiplier effects in agricultural markets. There's a really quick question in the chat I want to address. Do we have any dairy labor numbers for the 150 dairies? in the Tule subbasin. Not in this particular presentation, but we could definitely talk about it. I'd have to go pull the information. We could talk about that outside of here. Yeah, for sure. So just want to kind of sit back and think about this just really quick. What does this mean? This means we've got fewer jobs. And so what do we think about where to go here? I mean, this is the idea, and the whole idea of the project is we wanted to estimate what this impact might be. Right? So we've got an idea right now. Here's an impact. We've got 7,000 to 3,000 fewer jobs that are going to be just in this particular area. What happens? What are ways that we can mitigate some of these impacts? We can dampen some of these impacts. So one of the ways we can think about is flexibility in our groundwater. Another way to think about it is how we repurpose things. And that's what a lot of the work that our project partners at UC Merced did and talked about on Monday. And again, we can have that stuff posted. One of the things I wanted to put up too and talk about is we know these things aren't going to be equally spread out. And so is there a way that we can or isolate where these impacts might be the heaviest and hit the hardest? And so Dan at ITRC again put together these wonderful maps and a ranking of census designated areas that might possibly be hit the hardest. So this is these are the census designated areas in the area that have critical groundwater overconsumption. Right. So granted, we don't have GSP implementation into these particular maps. Not a whole lot more that's going to happen in terms of getting a bunch of extra water in to mitigate this. So it's a matter of locating and isolating where we might go in and think about land repurposing, like the buffers, those types of things. So we can see in these different areas, we've got different isolations, pulling out the CDAs around the red space. And I can just flip through these. And again, we can go back to them and talk about them later and where things are at. But in general, it's a good, interesting thought to think about, where things are going to be hit the most. Again, here's our Tule subbasin right here. And we can think about those particular areas that are probably the CDAs that are probably going to be hit the most in terms of they're not going to have a whole lot of water here in the future. And so that particular agriculture might be good agriculture around those communities to think about repurposing. And again, on the south side. So where to next? I know this was it was a little fast, big picture look at what the analysis says, how we might think about ways to mitigate some of these impacts going forward, moving through our implementation period right now in our GSPs. So I think important things to think about and where we go from here is specifically identifying communities that are especially vulnerable to GSP implementation, and thinking about for those communities what resilience strategies are going to look like, and things like our community buffers, what works and what's going to work for those particular communities. Starting the transition now is going to make it going to mitigate the effects a lot more than waiting till this stuff happens, right? Until we start seeing land coming out. When I evaluate ways to improve flexibility in water demand management, again, we're doing that in different areas, but we want to think about how we can keep doing this and thinking about it, and then keep updating our models so that we can understand as the GSPs are implemented, how is this working, update with newer hydrologic information so that we're incorporating this. And then the next, I think, step in terms of broader climate change and the things that we've talked about recently with our regional hydroeconomic model is to incorporate greenhouse gases and how those are tied to different types of agriculture so that we can have a good understanding of how air quality is going to change as well when we're moving through this and we're transitioning types of agriculture throughout the valley. So again, this is a broad broad overview of what we've been doing over the last few years. We have a lot of different output, a lot of different talks and presentations and papers that we've put out over the last 3 years. Here's just a snapshot of all of these, and you can access all of this stuff on our website, which we just got posted and is live now. Let's say we're working on these direct impacts, and we've got a draft manuscript of it. We're going to be updating that over the next month or so we can get that out. And then the same thing for the repurposing farmland manuscript that Angel and the Marced folks talked about on Monday. Encourage all of you to go check all of that information out and some of this stuff out at the website, sjbagricultureclimatechange.org. And if you have questions or want to chat about any of this type of stuff, feel free to email me. And I think we can open up to questions.